Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Liz Myska. And today I have the distinct pleasure of having a new friend from the Accessibility Advisory Commission, the AAC for the City of Worcester, Kate McGrath. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just going to give a little background about what I know about Kate. Very little.
So
and the condition or the syndrome that you have, I know very little about, and I would imagine my audience doesn't know anything. So, Kate, can you tell us your story about what it is that you're doing, what it is that you're about?
Sure. So my name is Kate McGrath, and I came to the great city of Worcester to be a college student. I got my master's here in community development planning, did public health and youth work, and that led me to running Youth Connect at the WCCA, and I was living my dream, working with youth in the city. And then I took a job at Girls Inc. of Worcester during the pandemic, and I was running a remote learning hub. And during that time, it was a lot of stressors working during a pandemic and providing internet and Wi-Fi and support to youth. And during that time, my health was declining from a condition that took 30 years to diagnose me, which is called dysautonomia. Also, short term, I call it DYS. And dysautonomia is actually not a real diagnosis. It's an umbrella term, which means you don't have full function of the autonomic nervous system. So I knew I had this condition. It took 30 years to diagnose me while I was kind of growing up in the Boston land of physicians and doctors and having, more surgeries than you can count on your fingers and toes my whole life.
Like what kind of surgeries?
So it first started with my knee. When I was 7 years old, I said I have pain. They said, oh, it's growing pain. And I'm like, well, this doesn't seem like growing pain. Yeah. And then I wasn't having full bladder function. My bladder just wouldn't retain. It wouldn't hold frequent urination. That was the first telltale sign at a very young age. I also had a lot of developmental delays too. And I kept, having the knee surgeries, but because I was a determined athlete, that's all I cared about was to play sports. And I would have surgeries in between all of my seasons. I was a 3-season athlete.
Wow.
In high school, and plus I was a licensed luge for
oh my gosh.
sledder. Yeah.
That's the thing with the helmet and the sled?
Yeah, the sled. And then in college, I played field hockey for Clark University as a goalkeeper starting for 4 seasons. Wow. And I was always having off-season tune-ups, I would say, multiple surgeries. It was the knee, then the foot, then the hip. I've had tailbone. In between all of that, I had, implanted medical device for control my bladder. And that's kind of the story of, all these doctors didn't know what was going on, but we would just mask the symptoms, right? So with the bladder, I was on medications, and then they developed this device to control your sacral nerves, which controls your bladder. So I had that implanted at a young age, and that requires a lot of surgeries and
upkeep and maintenance.
Yeah,
right?
And maintenance, especially when you're diving on the turf for a field hockey game. You're breaking devices that, we didn't know could really happen until you're there. And then I always had heart rate issues, like tachycardia, like a fast heart rate. And then in college, they gave me a beta blocker, another masking of a symptom. And my whole life, my mom, who's been with me through every step of this way, at a very young age, going to Children's, going to a hospital in Boston, and all these doctors, we would all say, it's all related, it's all related. And all these doctors would say, no, that's not possible, it's not related, she's fine. And I think what it comes down to is they saw someone that looks healthy, and I'm putting that in quotes,
Right.
and who was an athlete, who was a straight A student, and I was thriving, but that thriving was with a lot of determination and perseverance, and really just determined to not give up, which is kind of the way I was brought up to, you know.
Were you afraid at any time that if you surrendered to it, if you're like, oh, this hurts, that would be like the slippery slope of...
Yeah, I refused because I loved sports.
Right. You love competition.
I loved it. And the thing is that in high school I played through complete knee tears, complete hip tears. In college I played with a complete broken foot and and then I needed about 5 hip surgeries. So, and that leads me to my decline of dysautonomia, because my whole entire life I just pushed through, you know, issues of broken bones and tears of tendons and ligaments and tissues, and I just dealt with the consequences, had a surgery, then I'm good to go, right? Yeah. I never knew until I learned the very hard way that if you push your autonomic nervous system, which dysautonomia is the dysfunction of your autonomic nervous system. If you push your autonomic nervous system like I did while working during the pandemic and then in the summer of 2021, you can lead up to being kind of disabled, to my point. And I didn't know that was possible because I was always, I did it as an athlete. And
right. Nothing it always worked.
Yeah, I just had surgeries to fix it. But now you can push yourself to, you know, the point of where I'm at today. Yeah.
So what happened so again, I think COVID was for all of us.
Yeah.
We had to reorient and readjust, but it sounds like you were noticing at that time that was it fatigue? Was it exhaustion? Was it?
So first I was very fatigued. And my typical symptoms of dysautonomia and POTS, which is like the lightheadedness, the dizziness, the tachycardia, the palpitations, that was all getting worse. And my fatigue, I couldn't even, sometimes I couldn't even walk up the flight of stairs to get to the second floor of my workplace. I couldn't do much, and I slowly was realizing I'm not the same Kate as I was a couple months ago. And it was also the cognitive. With dysautonomia, you don't have complete, blood circulation head to toe, which means, okay, you have cold extremities of your feet and your hands, but blood flow to the head too, right? So if you don't have complete blood flow to the head, as I was declining, that was happening more, I wasn't having full cognitive function, meaning you could ask me a simple thing and I would be so confused because I was pushing myself to the breaking point. Right. And I think it was all just the weakness and the fatigue, and I slowly was like, I'm not myself, and my good friend of mine said, Kate, maybe it's pandemic fatigue. The day everything closed, March 13th, I was doing emergency childcare at the YW, and then I did the remote learning hub. I never stopped at Girls Inc. I never stopped, and I refused to stop until end of August, September, after providing the girls at Girls Inc. the best summer camp, which was really what I wanted. I know how hard they went through, the adversity they went through during the pandemic, and the long hours that required of me to work way overtime past the normal 8 kind of was leading to the fatigue and just the worsening. And it's really hard to explain when it's happening because I would never expect it to completely, put me at a point of disability because I never thought that could happen.
Right. I'm thinking that the way you're describing it, I think, when people go to college and they're like, I can stay up all night and study and do sports and do all of these other things because, my body's going to recover. Yeah. That's what I hear you saying. Also, again, when you were talking about the doctors, I just had that. I don't know. You're very young, but there used to be a kids game called Operation.
Oh, I know that game.
Yeah, and it was just it sounded like the doctors were doing that. Like, well, we'll take this and
And I had a lot of like surgeries that were kind of just like, but we never still, I don't know why I needed those surgeries. I never had an acute injury. Like, yes, I was an athlete, but I never had like a contact injury. It was like, oh, one day, oh, my hip hurts. Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, my foot hurts. And then it would end up being like complete, like just tears. And, you know, I also needed every major muscle of my right leg lengthened. I've had peripheral denervation where they cut the whole saphenous nerve trunk of my leg. And it was all kind of like I said, masking these symptoms until I say very serendipitously, I found this doctor who was a urologist, and she looked at what I call my surgery resume, right? Has all my surgery. I typed it all up years ago, and she looked at me, and she goes, in 2018 this was, and she said, "Have you ever had an AFT function test called a tilt table exam and a biopsy for small fiber polyneuropathy?" And I said, "No." She goes, "Okay, I'm going to put in those tests." And I thought, okay, whatever. Another test. I didn't look into what it was. I didn't have a smartphone back then, 2018, believe it or not. So I didn't even think much of it. I went into this AFT, which is autonomic function test, and it's a tilt table exam. They put you on a table and they tilt you from like a standing up, and I passed out within about 6 minutes, and I wasn't expecting that. And that's a red flag for POTS, which is one of the 15 types of dysautonomia. And so that was like, oh wow, there's like maybe some. I was right. It is all related. My mom and I were right. And then the biopsy showed the small fiber polyneuropathy, and so that was like kind of a moment where I'm like, wow, you know, all these years I think doctors may have seen someone who was active, good at school, and thought, oh, nothing's wrong, you know, it's anxiety, or, you know, you have chronic pain. And they used to tell me it's RSD, CRPS, which is kind of like pain syndromes. But I always knew, my mom and I knew it wasn't that. You know, I wasn't having full function of my bladder and my digestive system, which is still an issue that I've had my whole life, that now we know, oh, it's part of the dysautonomia. So when this doctor, a urologist, urologists, I will say, don't usually do this, but she did this. Goodness. Yeah, but this doctor did this during her study. She learned about it. And that's kind of the problem of dysautonomia, is that there's not enough knowledge. Yeah. There's not enough research, and that's due to many components. Mm-hmm. It's little known because there's not many fellowships, only a handful, for autonomic dysfunction. And when I was, you know, seeing these doctors in the early 90s, none of them were learning about dysautonomia in medical school. And even to this day, doctors aren't learning much about dysautonomia. So, you know, more so now since the pandemic of COVID-19, autonomic dysfunction is being seen more, but dysautonomia is still very widely little known, not understood, and we have little federal funding from the NIH, the National Institute for Health, which makes it really hard to learn about how to, you know, treatments and maybe someday a cure, or just simple daily treatments, or simple knowledge of, hey, if you keep pushing yourself, you're going to end up disabled with a dynamic disability. That wasn't even told to me. Doctor, we never really knew that this could end up this way. You know, we had some warning, but like not enough.
You know, my journey that I wore glasses, and I had cataract surgery, and then I started experiencing night blindness while I was driving the car, which is not a good thing. But no one at any time, and this is the period between 2000 and 2005 when I was diagnosed. No one ever said, and I would ask, you know, like, what do I have? And you know, there was no name. There was no name to it. It was just like, oh, you know, your retina is taxed, 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 okay. When I was diagnosed, December 4th, 2005, and that I realized there's a name to what I have. Nobody ever said blindness to me. And it was kind of like, and the first thing I asked was, am I going to be able to drive? Because my whole world, or at least I thought my whole world, depended upon me driving a car. I have now disputed that and debunked it. I've dissed the car, so to speak. But so there's, and now I'm working with medical students and physicians, and what I find is medicine, they want to fix you. They want to cure. Mm-hmm. If they don't have they're good at diagnosing, or they may not be good at diagnosing, but if they can't fix you, well then they're going to cast you aside, because that's what they're supposed to do. And then that gets us into the social version of disability. We people with disabilities, we don't need to be fixed. You know, we're fine. Society just needs to become more aware and more cognizant and more educated. It's not that we can't. It's that we do differently than others. It's not that we can't do. Exactly. So now I'm curious, because it sounds like you have seized upon, your own personal journey, and want others, not only legislators or policymakers, but others who may be laboring under this and thinking, I'm crazy, or there's something wrong here and I don't know what it is. And so there's that fear of, I don't want it to have a name, because if it doesn't have a name, then I don't have to deal with it. Yeah. So tell us about how your campaign to bring awareness and
of course. So, I cannot control, right, that dysautonomia is little known. I cannot control there's not enough funding or research or knowledge about my condition. But what I realize I can control is awareness and essentially being the hype woman for dysautonomia. There are great nonprofits out there that are doing legwork to try to get more research, but it's still little known. And the big aha moment for me that I knew I needed to do something was two things. The first thing is, even growing up, I was very quiet about my surgeries and my health situation. My best friends would call the home phone to my parents, "Where's Kate?" when I missed school. My mom's like, "She didn't tell you she's having another surgery." And I was always very quiet about it. And that quietness was just because I didn't really know how to explain it. And it just kind of like, whatever, why does everyone have to know? I just want to play sports. I want to be known for sports, not for the girl that's always having surgeries, which I was also known for that. Don't get me wrong. So when I had to leave work in 2021, one of my very best friends came to visit me. And this was my big aha moment. And I had loft strand crutches, or forearm crutches, because I couldn't have the stamina to move my body. And I was so weak. And she was like, "Kate, you had another hip surgery? You didn't tell me that." And I'm like, "No." I'm like, I told you I had to leave work for my dysautonomia. And that moment right there in my own apartment with one of my best friends was like, whoa, if my best friend doesn't, and because of me too, it's on me, that I'm not explaining this right, I need a fun way or a way to make my message, have a passion project, and I came up with Dis, which means dissolve dysautonomia. And in the medical world and the dysautonomia community, we call dysautonomia dys, because, all the dysfunction, a lot of things, but also because it's a long word. But so Dis is my awareness campaign, and it means dissolve dysautonomia. And that was kind of a fun pun. And it's also hidden meaning, right, Liz? Like, not everything is what it seems. And that is what my whole life story was. It took 30 years to diagnose me when I was not hiding from doctors. I asked my mom, how many doctors? 100, 200, hundreds at this point. And not everything is what it seems. So dissolve dysautonomia. My logo has a heart and a brain because that represents the autonomic nervous system, and the heart is, the tachycardia, the brain is the nervous system, the issues of blood flow to the brain, and the lifeline because I'm living, and I am here living, and as long as I'm here, I need to make dysautonomia known. We need to make it mainstream. And dysautonomia is so much more relevant than people think, okay? It affects more women than men. It affects many athletes after severe concussions. And it affects many people after the COVID-19 pandemic. So my mission is to dissolve dysautonomia, and I'm doing that by being the hype woman, just make the word mainstream. And that's kind of why I started it, because I know what I can control, which is telling my story and telling people about my condition and hoping that maybe someday that could inspire someone in the future to want to be a doctor that focuses on dysautonomia. Less than 100 doctors in the whole wide world focus on dysautonomia and autonomic dysfunction. And that's not enough, and very little is known. And, research for funding, the lack of, doesn't help, but I can control awareness.
What do you find is the biggest frustration for you, that people don't know or don't listen, or both?
I have a lot of frustrations, but they're not real frustrations, because I know that I am so blessed. I am so lucky to have the support system I have and the life that I have. And that is why I'm doing this campaign, because I can't fathom future generations living like this. I can't fathom future people having all these treatments and that we don't even really know if it's helping. Well, from my experiences, not much has helped. But my biggest frustration is kind of the misunderstanding of disability and dynamic disability in the classic, but you look and sound so good. And it's like, well, that's cool, but I inside am very, very ill. With dysautonomia, I don't have full function of any of my body systems, because your autonomic nervous system controls every function, your pulmonary, cardiac, digestion, temperature control, even sight. I was having trouble driving at night, and that was kind of the beginning of my decline. And your autonomic nervous system controls everything automatically, everything that happens subconsciously that you don't have to think of. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of my frustrations, is that, some people don't take dysautonomia or my condition seriously, because I may look like a young, healthy, and putting that in quotes, individual, but I really have to push myself and mask, so to speak, to put up a front that I'm doing well, when inside my body is not functioning. I think that is that's part of the awareness camp, too, of it.
I think it's, again, judging the book by the cover, because the people that I've have the privilege of rubbing elbows with, who are I call them VIPs, visually impaired people. We converse about, people would say, you don't look blind, and because like, how did you know that was there? And like, well, because I put it there. I can feel it. But having been an able-bodied and healthy person the majority of my life, that also is like a mirror image. It reflects back on me. It makes me think, how am I be perceived by others? And that's what you're talking about. Yeah. But also, how am I perceiving myself? Because again, it may be I'm looking, scattered, but I'm gaining information. And the only I'll briefly, so I'm a white cane user, and so say I'm in an unfamiliar place, and there's a door in front of me, and someone was like, oh, well, push the button, the handicap door button. We're not trained to do that. We cane users. Why? Because we can't see the button. Yeah. So we're trained to come up to the door with our cane, use our hands, explore, pull and push and all of those kinds of things. Somebody observing me might think, oh, she's struggling to get in. No, I'm not struggling to get in the door. I'm learning about what's here, because I can do it independently.
Yeah.
I will accept help. So I think that's what you're saying too,
Yeah.
that people look at you and then they see you on wheels, which is a choice for your situation. And then they see you get up and they're like, what?
Yeah.
You're an imposter.
Yeah, and that's so true. And then some days I'm using an upright walker. When I go to areas that require less walking, and then they're like, well, you're in the wheelchair at the other place. Like, well, that's a larger event. I had a lot further to go. I don't have the stamina to carry my body weight. I don't have the energy, and and I don't mean like, oh, I'm tired. That's not what it means. It means your body doesn't have the strength,
Yeah.
And dysautonomia warriors, like from my personal story, we've been through a lot. I was doing these weekly IVIG immunoglobulin treatments, which is a blood product of 1,500 people, 6 to 8 hour infusions every single week. And I was told open-ended / the rest of your life, you'll have these treatments. And so essentially on my 27th treatment, 6 months in, I was identified as a heart attack at the ER as an adverse severe cardiac and pulmonary reaction, and that's kind of what we go through. I would do anything to get better, including this treatment that not much is known. It's a blood product, so your body processes it, it makes you feel sicker, but I would do anything to get better, and I'm willing to take those risks. And it's because we just want our life back, right? Our full health. And people see me, and I'm always a cheery, positive person, but like you said, it's kind of what's happening in the inside. It's that, because disabilities is an invisible illness.
Right.
And I think I would love for society in the world to really understand that, that's a big component to dysautonomia, is the invisible illness component, and the things we go through for treatments just to get better. Because for me, my dysautonomia kind of manifested to autoimmune compromise, and that's why I am so weak. But there's not much known, so who really knows what's really happening?
Right, and you're the guinea pig.
And so that's why we want to dissolve dysautonomia, dissolve this concept that it's little known. It can't be a full productive person in society. Dissolve that. There's not enough doctors, not enough research. And that's what I hope my awareness campaign can do. And so I do have a website.
I was going to say, how can people learn more?
So I do have a website, dysthedys.com, which is DISSTHEDYS.com. You can see my logo here if you're able, but it's dissolved dysautonomia. I had to succumb to social media, even though I'm very anti. But I had to succumb. That's how you reach society, and I'm very silly on it. I take a different approach. But I just want to make awareness known for dysautonomia, because I cannot fathom future people to live like this. I'm okay because I've been preparing for this my whole life with all my surgeries and going what I went through at a young age. I've been prepared, but not everyone had that. So I'm here on a mission.
Yeah,
so thanks for having me.
No. And I want to say, when I became a VIP, I don't like to be identified as a person with, I don't like the word disability, so I like the dis.
Yeah, I love it.
I am differently abled. I am not disabled.
Exactly.
So we are definitely sisters.
We are
in our mission to educate and bring awearness to people,
exactly.
and have them join our ranks. I mean, we're not contagious.
No,
we're not a contagion, but we want our message to be contagious.
Yeah, exactly. So. Well said. Well said.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you, Liz, for having me.
I love the enthusiasm that you bring, and the passion that you bring.
Thank you.
Despite the trials and travails.
Yeah.
So
that's what life is all about. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Join me again for another edition of Connecting the Dots.
Please note that the information provided in this show is not a substitute for consulting with an experienced local attorney and receiving counsel based on the facts and circumstances of a particular transaction. To contact Lizbeth, email her at Lizbeth@elizabethlmyska.com or call her office at 508-753-7681. We're online at connectingthedots.lawyer. Executive producers, Liz Myska and Jack Peacock. Producers, John Medberry and Bill Hamilton. A production of Elizabeth L. Myska, JD, LLM, in association with Compliments.